This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to Balanced Debate for the Old North State. This week we're going to put our panel through their paces as we begin by asking why so many of our children fail to receive the sound basic education guaranteed by our Constitution. We'll discuss a recent column saying we don't need any more politicians, but instead more leaders. We'll explore why so many women have registered as candidates in the 2018 elections. And as always, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of the panel, let's introduce you to this week's panel. First of all, former Governor Bev Perdue, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, Dennis Wicker, former lieutenant governor, and Gene Arnold, former legislator from Nash County. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages from our underwriters.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
Let us begin. In 1997, our Supreme Court, in the landmark Leandro decision, declared that our Constitution mandated that every child receive a sound basic education, regardless of where they were born and lived and their socioeconomic circumstances. Well, it's been 20 years since that decision, and even though we've made progress, Superior Court Judge David Lee has ruled there are still too many children who aren't getting that guarantee. Question one to Dennis Wicker. Our state spends more than 57 cents of every tax dollar on education. In your years in the legislature and as lieutenant governor, would you say we're doing a better job of educating our children? And do you ever think we'll ever be able to fulfill that mandate?
Well, Tom, it shouldn't depend on what zip code a child lives in as to what kind of education they get. And unfortunately, we're still in that kind of mode. For example, the per pupil cost for expenditure for a child in Northampton County is much lower than it is, say, in Wake County. So we still have a wide gap there, and we need to close that gap. And
per pupil cost or per pupil spending?
Well, per pupil spending.
Yeah, okay.
Expenditure of that
right.
child. And so what we need to be focused on is to close that gap, but it's going to be hard given the economics of our state and the rural-urban divide that we have in terms of tax base and what they can do, because a lot of this comes from local supplements, which the local governments fund for teachers. But we're doing okay. I mean, in 4th and 8th grade reading, we're sort of in the last 5 years been flat in our testing. We are doing better in our graduation rate, but we have a long ways to go.
Gene, you've been very interested in education for a number of years, in fact, including serving as chair of the Public School Forum in North Carolina. Why aren't we making greater progress? Dennis says we're doing okay. Why aren't we making greater progress?
Well, I'm not sure, Dennis and I would take a little bit of exception as that some areas are doing very well and graduating 90% of the kids out of the high school. However, across the state, over 28% of the kids do not graduate from high school. It's a multifaceted problem that will take a lot of people getting together and addressing the issue. And to begin with, if you want to solve a problem, you have to know what the problem is. And a sound basic education is identified by different people over a different period of time, and the measurement changes.
So it'd help to be able to get a yardstick to know exactly what that includes.
Absolutely.
Bev, I know this has been a real interest to you, early childhood education. We spend $13 billion a year on education. 57% of it goes to K-12, 39% to universities, 5% to community colleges. We get wrapped up in this constant argument between people on the progressive side, including a lot of educators who say we aren't spending enough. Then on the other side, we've got people who say the problem is not how much we're spending, it's how we're spending it. Where do you come down on that argument?
It's the work I'm doing now in my post-political life. I actually...
Your real life.
My real life. I love it, my real life. You know, I'm doing a whole lot of work around competency-based education. It's my opinion these days that if you have a good technology system, and North Carolina has the best in the country, we did that over the years, the legislature and the political leaders. So we have connectivity that's unparalleled across America. So every kid in every school in North Carolina, regardless of their zip code, has access to the very best talent in teaching around the country or in North Carolina. And in addition, you have all the remediation courses for the kids who aren't going through the system at their own level. I think we're going to have to step back, Tom, and rethink what we're doing with education. Should it be seat time, 180 days a year? Is that what your judge is? Is that what your yardstick will be? Or should we actually talk about competencies? If I graduate from high school and can't get a job because I have no skills, has the high school done a very good job of training me? I would say no. So I think that North Carolina's school systems, K through 12 and college, have to go to competency-based education.
John, when we talk about this Leandro case, Judge Lee, who took over from our old friend Howdy Manning, who was on this for so many years, the people were asking him to appoint an independent outside consultant, which he agreed to do. In doing that, are our educators and the superintendent of public instruction and the board essentially saying they don't have solutions?
No, it's
well,
important.
then why do we need an outside consultant?
Because the original idea behind the Leandro case, and it was just part of a wave of such lawsuits around the country, was to get a court order to spend a certain amount of extra money, and in some cases get court-ordered tax increases. That was the original plan in the 90s. In some places it worked. In lots of places, including North Carolina, it actually didn't work. Leandro, when it went to the Supreme Court, did not conclude we are spending $6,000 and the Constitution mandates $8,000 to make up the difference. It didn't go that way, and that was the way the plaintiffs originally wanted it to go, and the interveners, the larger counties. So where we are now is that we've been under this court order for 20 years. It was never a court order mandated a certain, what was called an adequacy standard. The original plan was an equity standard. They went to an adequacy standard in many other states. They never got there in North Carolina. What is happening now is that current administration, people in the legislature, people outside the legislature would like to relitigate this in a sense and get the Supreme Court, which is differently constituted, to basically rule differently and define sound basic education, not in simply the way the original suit did, which was specific, as Gene was saying, a qualified teacher in every classroom, a variety of other specifics, but to actually define it in terms of money. That's where this is actually going. That's what the consultants, in my opinion, were about. I think that if it gets to that point, we will no longer be discussing different approaches to education. We will have a constitutional crisis.
Interesting. But Dennis, all through this, the singular question, and Bev, I want you to sound in on this too, because you got involved in one of these lawsuits of trying to understand this governance structure that our Constitution calls for. And if you read it, it makes as much sense as mud. But we've got another lawsuit over this. Why can't the courts once and for all proclaim who's in charge of public education?
Well, partly because our Constitution sets up who's in charge of education, and that's even been litigated. Well, that's the question for the court. They are trying to figure out exactly how our structure should work. But to your point, I don't think we can come out and get anything done in education that's going to move the needle until we fix the governance problem.
Bev, you were involved in one of these lawsuits.
I lost that lawsuit, Tom, if you remember.
Well, yeah. Exactly.
I found I wasn't in charge. Well, and I think the governor should be in charge. I think the buck stops there. I think the governor appoints most of the board, and the superintendent is duly elected. I think that state superintendent should be the PR person and the mouthpiece, the collaborator, the person who initiates cooperation. But in terms of accountability, the governor is where the buck stops. If our scores don't go up, then it's going to be the governor who's blamed. And the General Assembly then has to be forced to fund good teachers, pay them.
I think that's a good argument. I think that it is, practically speaking, the governor is who everybody knows.
You're agreeing with me.
I am. However, the
There's a big but here coming
well,
out.
no, not necessarily. But you were asking Dennis, when is the Supreme Court going to straighten this out? Frankly, respectfully to our justices, they aren't supposed to. The Constitution is clearly ambiguous. It does not answer the question.
Yes.
So if we're going to answer this question, I don't want the Supreme Court to invent an answer. I want us to amend the Constitution to make it clear. And if we want to put the governor in charge very clearly, let's do that through a constitutional amendment.
Tom, please let me weigh in. I totally agree with what Bev said also. I think that there has not been anyone in charge except there have been so many in charge.
Yes.
Every member of the General Assembly has an equal say, and all of them have an answer to education issues. I think we need an education czar, pay them what the president of the university system gets, and let them get the K-12 people, university people, and community college people, and design a system that's cohesive for all of those. And I think then we might have.
I wrote a column on this one time, Gene. I almost got run out of town.
This is easy to say. We're all talking about the solution. But the real question is, do we have the political will to do what we're talking about? You've got the local boards of education, you got the county commissioners, you got the legislature, you got the governor, you got the state board of education, you got the superintendent.
You got NCAE,
you got
the
NCAE.
principals. Yeah.
I'm telling you, when you poke at that hornet's nest, you better become armed, ready, and willing to take on a
There's
real.
a group you didn't mention though, which is the voters. And even if we all think that it would make sense to change the governance structure, the voters would have to approve a constitutional amendment.
Right.
And if that involves giving up the power to elect a key office holder who has power over, let's say, public education, the voters might not be.
They start speaking Russian yet.
Yes.
But to your point, this is the heartbeat, I think, of the problem of impeding.
So instead,
real
what
education.
happens is we keep nibbling around the edges. For instance, in this past legislative session, the legislature set up a commission to study school funding.
Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
What are we supposed to find out from that?
I don't know about funding, but from 1994, we did what we said. We told the Board of Education, the community college, university to do exactly that. They never, ever had a meeting. But the funding is totally out of whack. Why not let the research universities fund themselves? Then let the state fund the rest of the colleges, the historically black units and the other colleges, and the rest of the systems. You'd have more money.
I think I'm going to be out of town for the next week or so.
The answer becomes, what if a cow could fly? I mean, the what if is so big you can't conquer it. And so Dennis's point, I think, is quite accurate. You've got to find the political leadership, and that should be led by the General Assembly and the governor.
And John,
make it happen.
one of the latest movements, because we have a movement du jour, so to speak. TIP, whatever. The latest one now is we're going to break up the larger school districts, which is opening up another can of worms. Is that ever going to happen?
It's a complicated subject that is often not well handled by both various sides of the story. What is underappreciated, but absolutely a big driving force, are people who have moved to Wake County or Mecklenburg County or Guilford County from Connecticut, New Jersey, Ohio, New York. They are deeply puzzled when they don't have a choice of school district. They can't go to different parts of the county and be in different school districts. They find this bizarre. There are parents in Matthews, where my father was the principal of that school years ago in Mecklenburg County, and they have been insisting for years, we simply want Southern Mecklenburg County to have its own school system. They think that is entirely practical. There are some great challenges and complications, but in the long run, I think there will be more diversity of school districts.
I'm not sure whether any of you saw it or not, but last week David Brooks, New York Times columnist, wrote a very interesting column. He says demography does not have to equate destiny. In other words, there are districts like Chicago, Washington, New Orleans, where people lower socioeconomic conditions are excelling. And he says the biggest factor of success in schools is good leadership. And to him, principally, it's the local school principal. Now, we've placed a lot of attention on teachers through the years, I know we're beginning to place some emphasis on principles. Are we doing enough, Dennis?
Well, no, I think we're not emphasizing the principal enough. I think that the principal is the key person to the success of a school. They are, in essence, the CEO of that school, and the leadership that they give the teachers makes a big difference.
And Gene, he says that the study says that a principal needs to be in place at least 4 years, 5 to 7 years. However, the statistics show the average principal burns out in 4 years. And the reason for that is so much bureaucracy and red tape and pressure and so forth like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything the man said, and we did a study back years ago and found that to be exactly what he says. There are too many demands on principals, but to me the key one is that they are required to fill a teaching spot, put a body in front of those kids in that classroom, and sometimes what they have to get, particularly like lateral entry with no training in pedagogy, doesn't help.
Well, building off that discussion about better leaders in our schools, recently the Gallup organization reported that only 38% of Americans are very satisfied with how well the U.S. system of government is working, much less education. And that's down some 30 points from the turn of the century. John, you wrote a column recently, which I found to be very compelling, in which you said that part of the problem is leadership. In that column, you said we've got plenty of politicians who know how to get elected. But what we need is leaders who can build public confidence and stop shouting at each other and listen as much as they talk. Reading between the lines, it almost sounds like you're advocating a return to that collegial era of compromise instead of partisanship. Is that the case?
Wait, a conservative would advocate a return to the past? How dare he? What I was observing from those Gallup surveys, and in fact people assume that when the Republicans are in charge of Washington or the state or something, they're happy with government, the Democrats are unhappy, and it flips around when the Democrats get in power. Actually, the studies show that even Republicans today, looking at the federal government and having control right now of Congress, having control of the White House, they're mixed about confidence in government. Of course, the Democrats are very upset. So there's something different today than there was a generation ago or 2 generations ago. You can see it very clearly in the numbers. One of the things people often say about this is, well, it's not really about leadership, it's the public. And the leaders just reflect the people that elect them or don't elect them to office. And my column was designed to challenge that. There's actually a lot of good evidence to suggest that people's views are somewhat malleable. They change their opinions on things according to what their leaders say, whether it's an issue or behavior. So, for example, as recently as 2014, 2015, Republicans were more in favor of free trade than Democrats.
Does that mean we need to resign ourselves to the fact that NC Spin is just fake news?
Well, no, I think what we're trying to do is suggest that ideas matter. I was going to say that Republicans now are less in favor of trade than Democrats. That's pretty much following Trump. It's not because of ideological shift.
We got 3 people around this table who have run, in some instances, for a lot of elected positions. And I want to ask you, what's it going to take to get rid of all this political posturing and tribalism and get to what John's advocating, which is leadership?
I read John's piece. It was a great analysis of what the problem is. I would add to that, though, gerrymandering. I think when we get to Washington and when we get to the state houses across the country, we're so different in our philosophies and we're so different in how we think that we don't even talk to each other. And I think that's a real problem in communication.
Bev, what's your answer to that?
Vision. You need leaders who are willing to stand up and say, we need to do this for the future.
All right, but
so
with
it's not
the divisiveness, I mean,
well,
there's a mean-spiritedness out there that I don't think I've ever seen before.
It permeates the country.
How can a leader overcome that?
I think you just have to stick to your guns. I think you have to stand up and say, this is what I believe should happen in North Carolina or America, and I'm going to push that way.
Gene, you agree?
I don't know how you're going to resolve and change behavior, but the partisanship is just unbelievable today. The name calling that people want to hear and having to satisfy the different segments in both Democrat and Republican parties is going to take a few funerals.
And as we get ready to go into the primary elections in May and the general elections in November, I think the big question before us as voters is, how do we determine which candidates are just politicians and which ones are losers or leaders? So the primary elections are in place. In less than 6 weeks, we're going to go to the polls and vote. We've now got a state board of elections that's in place, local boards in place. The campaigns are underway. In looking at the field of candidates, one thing that's fairly obvious in this is that we've got more women running for election this year than we've ever had before. Congressional races, in congressional races, 420 women are running. The previous high was like 298. 116 women are running for the General Assembly. 27% of all the candidates that are running. Bev, you shattered the glass ceiling in North Carolina, being our first female lieutenant governor and our first female governor. I know you celebrate this large increase in participation, but I want your opinion. Why are women so evident this year? Why are they so energized to run?
I think they're fed up with what they see. Women think differently and I think govern differently, Tom. Things that come to a culmination, you have a different country. Right now you have 47% of the women in the country leaving the home to work for pay outside to support the family.
I always thought it was higher than that.
It's 47%.
Wow.
It is higher in North Carolina, but the national data is 47%. And those women experience different things in their workplace, and so perhaps they have gotten fed up with the discrimination or the talking down to, and then other women and men have seen women can be really super leaders, really good, just like a guy, so that comparison stops. And then I think that the thing that really forced women to really want to get energized in politics, I was a part of it. After the presidential election last year, the rhetoric, the degradation of women seemingly to so many of us, this big women's march in Washington, more than 1 million women went. Yeah, all over the country, but the one in Washington had more than 1 million women. It was a magnificent day when you saw women from all places in America say, hey, I can run, I can do this better. And then on top of that, the culmination was the Me Too movement.
Gene, out of these statistics of 116 women running, a large preponderance of them are Democratic women. In fact, there are very few Republican women running this year. Why are so few Republican women energized?
I wish I knew, and I wish I could answer your question, but I can't. I would say that I think gender doesn't make any difference. I think the brain power is what should be considered. I think women are more available. Men don't want to give up the high salaries that they have in their businesses, and women don't have to worry that much about it. Someone used to campaign on that you needed more women in the House, and they were talking about the House of Representatives.
I think you said that once or twice before, did you not?
Women's places in the House, and they said, Gene, I would disagree if I might. Sure. Women make good salaries too. Don't assume that every woman who's working doesn't make a commensurate wage with a man.
But they're willing to give it up.
I don't know that's true. I'd like
Dennis,
to see the data.
Somebody asked Becky Gray, who's one of our panelists on the show, why she thought more Republicans, women were not running. And she said she just didn't think they wanted to get involved in this toxic environment we got right now. You think that's the case?
No, I think that's the case for both men and women. One of the things I think we do lack is people wanting to take and get involved in public service. And when you have the toxicity of what's going on in the environment we have today, people in general, Tom, women and men, just don't want to get involved.
Right.
John, the deal is this. 54% of the women, population-wise, the demographics, 54% of our population is women. They only hold 25% of the seats in our legislature. Let's play what if. What would happen if that percentage increased to a third or maybe even a half? How would our legislature be different?
I think there would be some differences in operations and in rhetoric. People should not assume there would necessarily be differences in outcomes.
All right. Well, I need to move to the portion of the show that viewers just constantly talk to me and tell me they enjoy it so much, and that is the part where I ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Gene Arnold, I'm going to start with you. Tell us something we don't know.
Great, Tom. We have 14,000 kids in the Nash Rocky Mountain school system, and I was talking to the statistician there, and they said that 10% of those students have a diagnosed mental disorder or problem.
Wow.
Plus, fully 30% have some diagnosed problem that needs to be addressed.
Dennis, tell us something we don't know.
Well, you know, we talked about the Leandro decision, and we didn't, I don't think, mention, but the governor started a commission on that decision as well. And the chair is Brad Wilson. Look for them to go outside the bounds of that and look at some different things that could improve education.
John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
The Brookings Institution recently did an analysis of the counties around the country that are most exposed to trade wars, and the Carolinas contain many of them. We export lots of things around the world, and we should care a lot about trade wars.
All right. Bev Perdue, tell us something we don't know.
In 2030, 800 million jobs around the world that exist today will no longer exist.
Wow.
In North Carolina, 60% of the service jobs, like the banker, the accountant, the bartender, those jobs will disappear.
Be done by
so
automation.
What it says is you got to retool and reskill adults.
Wow. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback and read my weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch us on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.